from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, reckless. Why Russian President Vladimir Putin is being accused of nuclear terrorism. We will bring you the latest from the White House. Plus, how the war is affecting tech employees on both sides of this fight, from Ukraine and Russia. We'll talk to 2 tech employees on the ground. And the role of crypto in the Russian invasion and how crypto exchanges are navigating the crisis and sanctions. We'll get the view from Kraken CEO Jesse Powell. All of that in a moment, but first I want to get a look at the market. Stocks falling while the dollar climbed, with bonds as the war and risk to global markets escalates. Our Kriti Gupta has more. Kriti, take it away.
Yeah, Emily, a really risk-off tone in the markets, and it kind of seems like you're really not seeing that risk-off tone let up anytime soon. Check this out. The S&P 500 closing 0.8%. Even that safety bid for tech really not working in this environment. It all comes down to what the ramifications are of that war between Russia and Ukraine, specifically when it comes to commodities at a time when inflation is already surging. What does that mean for things like food prices, like oil prices? And at what point does that start to eat into that consumer spending ability? You can see those concerns really showing up into where people are putting their money. They're fleeing to the dollar, to gold. You're even seeing a bit into treasuries, even in the face of a very hawkish Federal Reserve, an 11 basis point move in the 10-year yield. So, Emily, the real takeaway you need to know is that it is a risk-off time in the markets, and it doesn't really seem like it's letting up anytime soon.
All right, Kriti, thank you for that quick update. President Putin now being denounced for his, quote, recklessness. This after Russian forces attacked a nuclear power plant, raising the stakes as the war goes into its 10th day. NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels condemned what Kyiv described as an assault on the Zaporizhzhia facility in southeastern Ukraine, Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horton joins us now from the White House. And Anne-Marie, we know that President Biden spoke with President Zelensky about this. What is the very latest in terms of the administration's position on what's happening here?
Yeah, President Biden was immediately on the phone with President Zelensky when that was happening overnight. The shelling at Zaporizhzhia, the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. It makes up also 20% of Ukraine's electricity. And immediately they were imploring Russia to pull back from that site. And I actually spoke to the IAEA Director General just hours before this happened, and he was aware of what was going on site. And he said that it was almost face-to-face contact between the Russian military as well as the locals that were outside of this massive facility. And then, of course, at night we saw the fire. It seems that the fire was just at a training building and that no radioactive materials have leaked. But, Emily, the concern has certainly heightened what is going on, this tension. And we should also note, this is the first time ever that a country that is being invaded has a vast amount of nuclear power plants. And this is why really the world was on edge today.
On edge, indeed. Emery, I also want to get an update on the oil situation. Obviously, there are increasing calls from Congress to act. The White House seems to continue to insist they don't want to disrupt the global supply of oil, especially coming from Russia. What is the latest on this?
Speaker Pelosi came out pretty emphatically saying, ban it now. And that is the U.S. imports of Russian oil. The White House now, Emily, is considering banning this Russian crude imports. We should note it's relatively small when you just look at pure crude. It's about 3%. But when you start to factor in other petrochemicals and other fossil fuel products, it's about 8%. And you look at the rankings, Russia's actually third, just behind U.S. neighbors, Canada and Mexico, and ahead of its key ally in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia. So this would be very symbolic as well. And also they're getting a lot of political pressure. But by and large, you're right. They have said for weeks that, yes, energy was on the table, but just yesterday, Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said that strategically it just doesn't make sense because that potentially would be a spike in price. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now in the market. And for this administration, they are dealing with higher inflation. So anything to try to quell those oil prices is going to be warranted.
Right. The stakes are high going into this 10th day. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horton at the White House. Thank you, as always, for your reporting. I want to dive deeper into the situation following that nuclear power plant being hit in southeastern Ukraine. I want to bring in Mark Nelson. He is the managing director at Radiant Energy and an expert on nuclear power. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. There has been some misinformation about this and a lot of fear. So I want to hear from your perspective, your version of what happened at this nuclear power plant and the status of it today.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, there was a lot of fear, and some of what I'm going to say about the timeline is definitely with hindsight, we know more about what happened. The plant is safe. We know from the IAEA it is in operation with 1 out of the 6 units. But what occurred last night was you could say it was the peak in 3 days of escalating interactions between Russian forces and very angry locals. The plant's located in a city named Energodar, energy's gift. And the locals are very proud of their plants, like everywhere in the world, and they didn't want to give it up. There appeared to be some kind of clash between Russian forces and people outside of the plant, outside of the, you might say, the nuclear safety area of the plant. There was a flare that went off, very bright lights, what looked like crowd dispersion, munitions, and later there was video of some armaments of some kind found on the unguarded or the unarmored crosswalks outside of the plant. So what occurred was a fire that we can see on the video in an employee training center. Fire was started somehow. Firefighters put it out. The plant remained in operation with 1 of the 6 reactors on. That reactor had 60% power. And when the sun came up, we had news from IAEA that they had been in contact with the plant on the ground, with the professional operators, and the plant went through the night, and in the morning was under Russian control.
Now, Mark, there was a tweet last night from Ukrainian officials calling this incredibly dangerous, also saying if it blows, it could be 10 times Chernobyl. Was that accurate, and just how dangerous was this?
That was absolutely inaccurate. These plants cannot go off like Chernobyl. They are not 10x Chernobyl. They're not 1x Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a radically different type of plant with no containment dome. These plants are reactors, small reactors inside of incredibly thick, more than 1 meter thick concrete knit with very, very strong and thick reinforced steel rebar. So that it was never going to go off. That was always false. And if there's any nation in the world that would understand the difference between Chernobyl and the reactors they rely on every day, it would have been Ukraine. Don't want to question motives, but that was, it seemed grossly irresponsible from my perspective. And certainly that's the headline that captured people's attention. I fielded inquiries from young parents hysterically wondering about their child, their unborn child, as far away as Sweden. And I've had to say, nope, first of all, false, can't do that. That's wrong. And I've had to walk people through the steps of how this facility is not in any way, shape, or form capable of doing 10x, 6x, or 1x Chernobyl.
So what is the real danger? If Putin and Russia capture these nuclear power plants, just how dangerous is it? What should we be worried about?
Well, each of the plants has a value of electricity production in the tens of billions of dollars over the next few years, right? So it's not clear that the Russians would intentionally damage the plants that are the same type that they operate over the border in their country. So it's not clear what they would try to do to damage, but let's look at what the safety situation would be if during some struggle over the control of the plant, something happened. Well, first of all, the heavy, thick concrete domes trap anything that goes wrong inside. Very intense bombardment, more than crashing jet planes into these reactors. They can survive that quite easily. So something immense would have had to happen to cause those things to vent. These are not even the same design of reactors like in Fukushima, for example. So what would have had to happen is with a complete loss of off-site power, let's say the grid collapsed or transmission lines were shot down or the switch yard in the plant had a fire and the plant was disconnected, that would lead to immediate shutdown of any of the reactors that were still on. I mean, even a shell landing nearby would lead to an automatic shutdown just from the seismic sensors, earthquake sensors. Then after the shutdown, emergency safety procedures would come on. This equipment would protect the plant unless that itself were specifically targeted and interfered with. So in the end, there's many defenses. We call it defense in depth in nuclear, from the inside, from the smallest inside of the reactor all the way out, increasingly massive and strong to survive just about anything. And that's what we would have almost certainly seen in this case if there had been a direct bombardment.
Okay, well, we of course are going to be watching what happens next and how Russian forces approached these nuclear power plants. Mark Nelson, thank you so much for putting it in perspective for us, Managing Director at Radiant Energy. We appreciate it. Coming up, as the war in Ukraine rages, could Russia soon impose martial law? We're going to talk to two tech workers, one with employees on both sides of this fight and one grappling with what's going on in her home country of Russia next. This is Bloomberg. As we continue to cover the situation in Ukraine, we are talking to tech leaders and employees where it's hitting closest to home. Today, we bring you the stories of Matthias Klenk, CTO and co-founder of Passbase, who is working around the clock to help employees stuck in Ukraine, as well as Russian employees who have fled the country. Also joining us, Ines Amir, a product designer at Zalando, who's also a Russian citizen and relocated to Germany back in August, but still has family and friends in Russia. Matthias and Inessa, thank you both so much for joining us. Inessa, I want to start with you. You decided to leave Russia months ago because you felt this tension escalating. Your parents are still there. Your friends are still there. How are you doing and how are they doing?
Well, thank you for asking. It has been complicated, of course. So I hope for the best. That's what I can say.
President Putin, we're hearing, could soon declare martial law. He is already cracking down on the media. This means that, the borders could be closed. It could be more difficult to protest, illegal to protest. I know one of your friends, I believe, was arrested for protesting. Yes. What do you think? What do you think about all this?
Well, what can I think? Well, it's awful. It's just awful. So I cannot fully believe this situation is happening. So we all in the country, I think, just missed this point when the things get so bad and so wrong.
Matthias, you have both Ukrainian and Russian employees. You've got Ukrainian employees, I believe, who are still in the country and Russian employees who have left. How are you navigating all of this and the challenges that both of these employees are facing?
Yeah, it's, of course, like a very tough situation. I think what we do in the first place is really try to support our team members with support and safety. Basically, some of these team members, since their currency got incredibly devalued, basically all their life savings are basically gone. So we're working with them, of course, in ensuring that they still can get their salary, even though some of their financial institutions now are on the sanction list. So this is one part, of course, what we do for our Russian team members in helping them and providing them safety. And at the same time, of course, we're working both with the Ukrainians and Russians and helping them to relocate if they want that. Some of them can't. So especially the ones who are in Ukraine, they're basically sent back at the border and almost called to arms and told that they have to fight. And it's, of course, a very tough situation for them as well. So in that sense, what we're trying to do is help them at least to stay and find a location where they can work from, even see that they can have access to internet, and just trying to somehow manage the situation with them together.
You're a young startup. I mean, are you saying that these employees, they're still working, they're still shipping code, doing their jobs in the middle of a war?
Yeah, this is pretty much insane. It's about 30% of our engineering team is either Russian or Ukrainian, and you can imagine probably that the productivity is far more than 50%, like even more impacted by that. And it doesn't even stop there. Like we have team members also in Lithuania and some countries close by, or even Germany. And pretty much everyone here in Europe is like heavily impacted by this situation. And on the one side tries to support our team members who are like literally in the midst of this, but also we as like a leadership team, of course, provide them the space that they can show basically their support for them, and also we canceled meetings that they can go on protests, for example, here in Berlin. So this is at least the minimum what we as a company can do, is creating the space for them to show social engagement here.
Inessa, your friends who are still in Russia, your parents who are still in Russia, are they trying to leave? Do they want to leave? Do some of them support this war? I know many people do not.
Yeah, that's true. Many people do not support the war, and none of the friends and my family, none of the people of my close circle is support. But I hear the stories also from some of my friends that they do not speak with their parents anymore because the parents tends to see the situation differently. So, and yeah, the majority of people is trying to escape Russia right now. I would say that almost half of my closest circle managed to escape in Armenia and Georgia and closest countries. Of course, it's not that easy with my parents because they retired. So I don't really know how to support them in this situation. So, but yeah.
These sanctions are getting tougher every day, sanctions coming in from around the world. How is this impacting everyday Russians? Obviously, the target is wealthier Russians, but how is this impacting the people that you know who maybe had nothing to do with this?
Yeah, that's true. It impacts people in every way. So basically, my parents lost almost all of their savings, just basically overnight or in the course of the last week. Same I can say with some of my friends. Also, a lot of them was receiving their salaries in Russian rubles. So, and also with all this situation with the companies stopping to provide their services in the country, we can already see a lot of change. And I think it's going to be only more of them, unfortunately.
Matthias, is there any way that you can describe ideologically how this is impacting your company, given how much of your team is Ukrainian or Russian, and how emotionally difficult this is?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, what we also offered is, of course, mental health support to all our team members who are affected by that. And it's just like a really tough time. And I think we just need to help our team members really to go through this tough time and help them, and not only them, but also like their relatives to come to Germany if it's possible and relocate them if they want that. But it's just like such a sad thing what's happening right now, and it's at the same time you also feel like a feeling of like powerlessness because you only have like very limited impact on that here from Germany basically.
How concerned should we be about the tech industry, given the deep bench of tech talent in this country, in both of these countries, and the fact that these people are working for companies, global companies around the world? Are you worried for the supply, the great talent that all of these developers and engineers and product designers possess and have to give back to the world?
So what I think what is going to happen likely in the next coming of weeks is, of course, that more team members will try to either leave Russia and Ukraine to more Western European countries. And I think this is also what Inessa just touched upon, that some of her friends already tried to leave. So I think in the short term, this is, of course, there's like a high impact, especially for teams like us who have a lot of team members in one of those countries. Long term, I think, and this is already what we saw from the European Union, which I strongly welcomed, is that we are like very like friendly towards giving visas towards those people impacted by the situation. And I think this is absolutely the right move to like protect civilians and allow them basically to escape from this tragedy and bad situation in those countries.
Inessa, you have left your country. Your parents are still there. Your friends are still there. How do you see your near future? How do you imagine this ending?
That's a tough question. Of course, I will try to help my friends to escape. I help them to get a job in Germany. With the parents, it's much difficult because, as I said, they are in quite an old age right now. My only hope, that when the situation would start to decrease, I mean, the heat of it, that maybe some countries will still open their borders, will still have their borders opened with Russia, and I can at least invite my parents there, and we can meet during a short vacation. That's all I can hope right now, probably no more.
Do you think you'll ever go back to Russia?
That's also a tough question. I don't think so. I wouldn't say never, but unless this regime is in power, I would rather not to. I would go there only if I definitely have to do it. Like, I have some family business to do, but personally, I'm afraid of my safety. If I would go there, I cannot be sure that I can get back to Germany.
Inessa Mir, product designer at Zalando, Russian citizen. Matthias Klenk, CTO and co-founder of PastPace. Thank you both for joining us, for sharing our story. We hope that you both stay safe. Much more coming up on Bloomberg Technology. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Another story we continue to watch: Microsoft, the latest company to limit business in Russia. The U.S. tech giant saying it's halting all new sales of products and services in Russia as it condemned the country's invasion of Ukraine. Microsoft saying it'll also help cybersecurity officials in Ukraine defend against Russian attacks. Coming up, we're going to take a look at how Silicon Valley is reacting to what's going on in Ukraine and how it's impacting not only big tech, but also small startups and venture capital. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. How are investors hedging geopolitical risk in Ukraine? Our Kriti Gupta has been digging into that. Kriti, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward trade here, Emily. You are seeing the surging oil price, surging commodity prices. So naturally, you do get that exposure in the stock market, but you also get it through defense names. It makes a lot of sense as you start to see a lot of these European nations really ramp up their defense, seeing some of those lessons from Ukraine. Naturally, they go to the number one maker or exporter, I should say, of defense kind of companies. And that, of course, is the United States. So check out this ETF, the three major ETFs. You can see the flows have just skyrocketed going back all the way 2 years, moves that you haven't even seen during the trade war between the United States and China. But this isn't the only kind of defense they're looking at. Emily, we are on day 9 of the Russia and Ukraine war, and you can see very clearly people are betting on cybersecurity as a really key piece of that defense strategy. And of course, we do know that Russia does have an upper hand. They are very strategic in using cybersecurity measures. That has been one of their criticisms in the past. So if you actually look at the stocks coming over, say, the past 2 weeks, for example, you can really see that these names like Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, that really kind of specialize in cybersecurity, they're the ones that are getting the bid. Basically, a assumption that a lot of corporate America is going to start looking to cybersecurity names to ramp up their own defense systems, Emily.
Okay, Kriti, thank you for that roundup. Meantime, the tech world has wasted little time announcing plans to cut business ties with Russia over this unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Just this week, we saw Apple, Oracle, Disney, Meta, Spotify, Microsoft, just to name a few. But not everyone is following suit. Earlier this week, the CEO of WeWork had this to say on Bloomberg.
We have just 4 locations in Moscow. We do incredibly well. We are, as of right now, over 90% occupied. It's a small part of our business. The revenue is about, top line revenue is about $10 million on our base of several billion dollars. So it's a very small part of our business. Not much of a financial or business impact to our business.
Since that comment, WeWork announced it's partnering with the UN to help the more than 1 million refugees who fled Ukraine, adding it's also offering flex space across Eastern Europe to displaced Ukrainian businesses. However, WeWork still operating in Russia. I want to talk more about all of this with Alfred Schwong, general partner at Race Capital. Alfred, I want to start big picture. You are no stranger to witnessing global conflict and the impact on global and local economies. Just how chilling do you think the impact of this invasion of Ukraine will be on the global economy and on the tech industry?
Hi, Emily. Thank you for having me back. Very good to see you. Well, this is a very personal matter for me because when I was CEO of BEA System, in September 11, we lost 2 employees, one in the tower, one on Flight 93. So a part of me had forever died when those kind of things happen, and I have to be the one to call the family. It was very, very tough time, and these are chilling experience and memory. So for me, I think this impact is going to be a very long-term and very big. I've been warning our own companies and also our offices and employees in the Ukraine for quite some time, since early January, to take measure and set up backup plans for having backup offices in neighboring countries. Thank goodness at this point we have everyone accounted for, and they have now since safely have been moved to safe places, and they have been able to resume working. But it's an extremely scary time.
Money has been pouring into startups over the last couple of years. Do you think that's going to slow down?
I think likely not because of just this invasion. Without any doubt, we are going to be seeing some of the softening in the IPO market. Some people believe the IPO market is temporarily closed. So when you have liquidity kind of all of a sudden drying up, we will be seeing some late stage deals softening up on valuations, or maybe even having some early signs of difficulty in fundraising. But it's going to take a long time before it trickle down to the early stage deals. In particular, I think most of the venture investors have raised a lot of money throughout this time. So we have a lot of dry powder to continue to invest in companies. The view of investing in those companies obviously over time will change, because think about this, like our own companies now, we have to advise them to take everything about the sanctions very seriously. So if they are selling to Russia, they will have to be very careful, and we have to assume some of those customers will have to say goodbye to. So that will have impact. The European market has been extremely hot for early stage startup for the last 12 months. There's no doubt that will be impacted in this coming year, the rest of 2022. So those impact we're going to be feeling pretty well. So for startups, I all advise them to be careful with their cash, to have ample run rate, and be careful if they want to be going out to fundraise, to do it early and do it diligently.
Now, we just went through the list of businesses cutting ties to Russia. I spoke with Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, just a couple of days ago and asked whether or not Airbnb would cut off service to Russia. Take a listen to what he had to say just a couple of days ago. Are you willing to consider, tougher self-sanctioning in Russia, even though, it sounds like hosts are limited right now based on what they can do? But would Airbnb consider going so far as to cut off the service?
I think all things are on the table right now. So we're really focused right now. I've been working around the clock with the team to try to figure out how can we house 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. But we have another team working with local governments and really trying to answer these questions. And if we have an update, we'll certainly let you know.
Brian Chesky tweeting last night that Airbnb is indeed now cutting off service to Russia and Belarus. Is this something that you think all companies should be doing?
Well, that's definitely the advice I've been giving to our own startup CEO. So most of our company have come to me over the last weekend in particular. We're seeing our open source companies seeing huge amount of package download from Russia. And some of the CEOs calling me and said, what should I do? So I've been advising them, I said, at this point in time, you must block, because we honestly don't know how to sanction, where does it lie and what our responsibility are. But, we also have to play our part, right? So what is right has to be right. I mean, this is a time where we all have to step up, to have our moral gauges to know what's the right thing to do. And one other thing I would like to add, though, the Russian people are innocent, right? So most of them, they have nothing to do with this war. So we got to be very careful we don't end up discriminating many of our friends that are good friends that are doing the right thing that are Russians. So we got to have that distinction very, very carefully.
Right. There's a line between, a fine line between who is this affecting, and clearly these sanctions are impacting a lot of everyday Russian citizens. To that point, how much money is in the venture capital ecosystem? How much Russian money is in the venture capital ecosystem? And should founders be questioning whether to take that money? Should they return that money?
Yeah. So for us, obviously, for us, we have never taken any Russian money for our fund, for the people that invest in our fund. I'm sure that throughout this time, there are people that directly and indirectly have invested into venture capital or directly into direct deals into the companies over this time. But I think those are the things where we need our government to guide us to know what's going to be that line, and money that they have taken that are actually ingrained in the spending of the company. What do we do with them? Those obviously are not for me to judge. Those are actually, we need guidance from the State Department and to know exactly what to do. I mean, we've seen this movie before. We have, the Soviets, when we have shut down, funding from China. And then I think overall, very smoothly, our industry and also, the tech companies were able to react very quickly, and we'll be able to tuck right in line and be able to comply to all the needs. At this point in time, I think we're still too early. It's very chaotic. I think the most important thing to do is to worry about the people. If we have employees, if we have companies, we have founders, we got to make sure them and their families are safe. That's job one.
What about venture capitalists? Venture capitalists are very powerful. They've got a lot of money. They're typically more quiet. Should they be taking action, cutting ties, pulling people out of funds, cutting off partnerships?
Actually, I think some of them are not as quiet as you think. I know that I have good friends, they run very large funds. They've been very active. They created email aliases. A lot of actions have been taken to help the Ukrainian people, to end the situation now. I'm sure that I think in the days and the weeks to come, we're going to see actions from venture funds of taking actions, also in terms of sanctioning what the Russian money coming in. We all have to do our part. It can't be just, at a very, very macro level. I think at a fine-grained level, we all have to do our part. I'm sure this is coming.
Alfred Trong, Race Capital General Partner, thank you for sharing your perspective here with us. Coming up, we're going to be joined by Kraken CEO Jesse Powell, a deep dive on the role of crypto in the Russian invasion and the Ukrainian resistance, and how his crypto exchange is navigating the crisis and calls to cut Russia off. This is Bloomberg. The crypto industry has gotten a lot of attention after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Some government officials wondering whether Russia or the country's tycoons might be able to skirt sanctions using crypto, and Ukraine actively seeking donations via digital assets. But Binance, Coinbase, Kraken, and more have come out against blanket bans on Russian users. I want to bring in Kraken CEO Jesse Powell for more on this. Look, Jesse, you've been very clear that Kraken won't freeze the accounts of general Russian users. Given the events of the last 24 hours, Putin's escalation of this war, does your position on that still stand?
It does still stand. It's really hard to know as a private business, which doesn't have a major global geopolitical analyst function inside it, trying to evaluate these situations play by play. We look at our role as being able to follow executive orders from the White House, being able to follow OFAC and sanctions coming from the government. We're very happy to comply with those. We've got a long history of working with governments and law enforcement. But to ourselves, just decide to impose account freezes on individual Russians who probably don't support this invasion, I think is a step too far. And, it's freezing someone's finances is more than just sort of stopping selling them shoes or photo filters. You know, it's a pretty extreme measure, and we won't do it until we're forced to do it by the government.
We know the Department of Justice is going after luxury assets of Russian tycoons, including crypto assets. Have you been contacted by enforcement officials? Are you cooperating? And what do you think the role is of exchanges in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, Kraken dealt with over 2,500 law enforcement requests last year. So we're in regular contact with law enforcement and regulators and governments around the world pretty much at all times. You know, we get more than 10 requests per business day. So we're actively in communication. We've got a 24/7 compliance team of over 600 people who is monitoring the situation and ready to respond to sanctions or any kind of executive order coming from the government. As a US-based company, we're obviously following the rules of the United States. And so when we hear from the government that there's something to do, we will comply and we'll do that.
Do you see the legal risk, though, as escalating? And are you consulting with officials actively to assess that and figure out what Kraken should be doing?
It's an ordinary course of business for us. There's not really anything special to do here. We're monitoring the situation. You know, we're sort of passive here in that the government can contact us at any time. We have regular contact with the government and many governments around the world. And so there's not sort of an active dialogue going on about what we're going to do outside of any kind of formal regulatory requirement.
Now, Chainalysis is reporting data that shows Russians, residents in sanctions hit Russia, they're not in a hurry to trade on crypto exchanges. Is that what you're seeing? What color can you give us on volume and liquidity?
Well, you know, Kraken doesn't have a ruble market. And so if Russians did historically want to get money into Kraken, they would have to be going through the euro or the dollar, you know, generally through the SWIFT wire system to get money in. And now that banks are shut off from SWIFT in Russia, it's going to be very hard for people in Russia to get money out of the country and into the global crypto exchanges. So I think they're going to have a tough time there. We haven't seen much activity coming out of Russia. You know, people might have already had their money in Kraken. They're still free to trade it. They're free to withdraw their cryptocurrency out of Kraken. But there hasn't been a lot of activity. And I think that's largely due to the sanctions that are in place now on the banking system. People just can't get their money in and out of the country now. And
what about crypto going in and out of Ukraine? Obviously, we know that Ukraine has raised millions of dollars worth of digital assets. What kind of volume and liquidity are you seeing there?
Yeah, a huge uptick in activity around the Ukraine. Obviously, tens of millions of dollars have been donated directly with cryptocurrency. And I think that's an amazing story to follow, that the government has directly raised money from all over the world to finance the defense. And people are able to, through crypto crowdfunding, able to support people directly without any sort of intermediary. And you know, we saw something similar in Canada as well, when the government of Canada sanctioned its own citizens and turned off protesters from the banking system. Cryptocurrency was there to continue to support people and be that financial rail of last resort, you know, where the government had revoked those permissions.
Ukraine is calling for more crypto donations, not just in the form of Bitcoin, but Doge and Tether. We've seen some mixed results here. Do you see the scope of digital assets as a force for good, or is it more complicated than that?
Definitely a force for good. I think currency choice generally is a force for good. I think the sort of de-weaponization of the financial system is a good thing. And you know, we look at sanctions against Russia as generally a good thing, a good way to non-violently, non-physically respond to you know, a policy that we don't like. Well, those same weapons that we impose on Russia, the sanctions, can also be imposed against your own citizens. And we've seen this happen in many countries around the world, obviously Canada most recently, but you know, often regimes turn inward against their own people. And when that happens, once funds are frozen, it's very hard to leave that situation. And so cryptocurrency is something that sort of exists as sort of cash under the mattress, you know, that you can take with you if you want to get out of a bad situation. If you're bank account has been frozen without due process. When your funds are frozen without due process, that means it's on you to go back and fight to get that back. And without any money to do that, you're worried about feeding your family. You don't have money to pay a lawyer to try to go get your money back that's been frozen in your bank account. So I think a lot of people are looking at crypto now as a sort of backup plan, as an insurance policy against their government turning against them.
What's your take on the macro risks right now, though? What are you most concerned about, especially as it pertains to cryptocurrency? I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about price and Bitcoin going to the moon, in your words, and we've certainly seen Bitcoin rallying, but then also pull back. Are you concerned about the risks to crypto, given what we're seeing in global equities?
No, I think you just look at the long-term 10-year chart of Bitcoin, and it's outperforming everything else in the world. So I'm not worried about it. And these kinds of geopolitical problems, we're seeing with Canada and Russia, are great examples of where Bitcoin really shines. Outside of being a speculative asset, it's really solving real problems for people on the ground. And I think the more people are going to see that, and it's going to become an even bigger thing as people look to Bitcoin as a safe haven.
Kraken CEO Jesse Powell. Jesse, always good to have you here. Thanks for sharing your perspective with us. Appreciate it. Coming up, Apple plans to unveil a new iPhone SE with 5G in a few days. Is it the right move for the company? We'll discuss. More on that next. This is Bloomberg.
In early March, Apple plans to unveil an iPhone SE with 5G. But the big announcement should really be a significant price cut to the current SE. The model currently costs $400, but if Apple really wanted to, it could lower the current model to $200 and turn it into a full-featured, low-priced phone for areas like South America, parts of Asia, and Africa that are currently Android strongholds. A $200 phone would make the current SE an extremely hot seller to those who don't need the functionality of 5G or a $1,000 plus iPhone 13. By expanding its user base with a $200 device, Apple could create more long-term services revenue and add way more people to its ecosystem fairly quickly. Dropping the price of the current SE to $200 would also give Apple an easy answer to its iPod Touch conundrum. That would allow the company to, quite frankly, discontinue the 3-year-old iPod at the same price. Such a device could also greatly assist Apple in India. That's a market that Apple once talked up as its next China, but one that's really been a bit of a roller coaster for the company in recent years. Recent data points to sub 5% market share for Apple in India, but the average phone price in the country is now about $200, meaning that Apple could potentially have a winner on its hands there with a nice price cut. Still, it's unclear if Apple will actually ever do this, but there may be no better time than this March, when Apple plans to release a new high-end 5G iPhone SE. I'm Mark Gurman. This is Power On.
Don't forget, you can subscribe to Mark's weekly Power On newsletter at Bloomberg.com, and we'll be following that Apple event next week. Apple updating its return to office policy. Meantime, the company setting April 11th as the deadline for corporate employees to return to in-person work at least one day a week, marking a key test of whether the tech giant can reestablish office life in a post-pandemic era. This coming a few days after Google sets its own return to office for April 4th. And Meta is actively looking at halting all advertising in Russia, according to Vice President for Global Business, Nicola Mendelsohn. She spoke to my colleague, Caroline Hyde, earlier. Take a listen to what she had to say about Meta's actions when it comes to advertising in Russia. Take a listen.
We are taking extensive steps across all of our apps to ensure the safety of our community and also to support the people who are using our services, both in the Ukraine and all over the world as well. We've established a special operations center. It's working round the clock. It's responding to activity that we're seeing on our platforms in real time. And we're really closely, monitoring the situation.
We'll be monitoring that, of course. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.